All right, let's dive into this explainer. When we think of the 1970s, our minds usually jump straight to the nostalgia, right? We're picturing bell-bottom jeans, vinyl records, maybe a few classic TV shows. But today, we're going to put all those vintage aesthetics aside to uncover the hard psychology of an entire generation's resilience. This is really about the psychological foundation that was quietly poured in neighborhoods all around the world. So I've got to ask you, what actually made a 1970s childhood so fundamentally different? I mean, it certainly wasn't because the era was somehow easier or universally safer. Actually, the big difference was an environment that organically fostered this quiet, unshakable confidence. It was this deeply rooted belief that whatever happens in life, well, they'll just figure it out. Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to look at the blueprint of this quiet strength, the power of boredom, risk, and reality, the psychology of self-efficacy, and finally, some lessons from modern childhood. Let's get right to it.
Section 1. The Blueprint of Quiet Strength, Stripping Away the Nostalgia.
To truly understand this blueprint, we really have to look past the carefully curated, highly supervised experiences that are so common today. Back then, it was all about freedom, and with that, immense responsibility. And this brilliantly illustrates that environment. Be home before dark. Just think about the sheer weight of that single sentence for a second. It represented an entire world where kids were expected to just go out, invent games, and solve their own problems, completely without constant tracking or adult management.
Now, modern psychologists actually have a specific term for this. It's called autonomy. Essentially, autonomy is the freedom to act independently, and it's an absolutely crucial, non-negotiable ingredient for healthy psychological development. Kids in the 70s, they experienced this every single day. Through self-directed play and the whole latchkey kid phenomenon, they weren't just being told they were capable. They were building true confidence by repeatedly proving it to themselves.
Section 2. The Power of Boredom, the Science of Unstructured Time. Think about today for a second. A modern childhood calendar is honestly often way busier than a typical adult schedule, packed wall-to-wall with tutoring and organized sports, and there's this tremendous, almost reflexive urge to hand a kid a tablet the absolute second they say, "I'm bored." But the 70s, they had long, echoing stretches of completely unstructured time, and the classic response back then was just, go find something to do. That blunt response was actually vital. It tossed the responsibility of entertainment right back into the kids' lap, forcing them to rely on their own minds.
Now, what's really interesting here is that modern neuroscience completely backs this up. That mundane, sometimes super frustrating feeling of boredom, it directly activates what scientists call the default mode network. When your brain drops into a state of low stimulation, this network fires up and it sparks creativity, self-reflection, and imaginative thinking. It turns out, wandering minds actually become creative minds. So for a 70s kid, an empty cardboard box became a spaceship simply because their brain was given the space to make that exact mental leap.
Section 3. Risk, Consequences, and Reality. Learning through the physical and social world.
You know, a 1970s childhood involved regular, everyday encounters with physical risk. We're talking climbing ridiculously tall trees, building sketchy skateboard ramps out of scrap wood, riding bikes without helmets, the whole shebang. So, let's walk through how this actually builds resilience. Picture a kid taking a tumble out of a tree. Step 1, they encounter the risk. Step 2, they experience a failure, like getting a scraped knee or a bruised elbow. But step 3 is where the magic happens. They discover survivability. They realize, hey, I'm okay. And that naturally leads right into step 4, confidence. See, they don't just learn a physical lesson about gravity, they learn this profound psychological lesson that mistakes and failures are completely survivable. And this independent learning didn't stop at physical risks. It extended right into their social lives, building what we now call social intelligence. Without adults constantly hovering around to act as referees during arguments or friendship conflicts, children really had no choice but to manage it themselves. They were forced to learn how to read people, how to compromise, and how to apologize and repair damaged relationships entirely on their own. The neighborhood was literally their classroom. Section 4. The Psychology of Self-Efficacy. Bringing it all together.
When we synthesize all these seemingly totally different experiences we've just talked about, the boredom, the physical risks, the lack of adult referees, it brings us to one grand unifying psychological theory, self-efficacy. Basically, self-efficacy is this deep-seated belief that you can successfully handle challenges and just figure things out. And you don't build that through praise alone or by getting a participation trophy.
No, it is forged through the messy, actual experience of facing manageable difficulties, struggling with them, and then eventually succeeding. So the crucial point here is that this has a massive, lifelong payoff. The research shows that people with strong self-efficacy cope way better with stress. They recover a lot faster from setbacks. They show greater resilience, they maintain higher confidence, and they adapt much more effectively to change. Honestly, all of those childhood scraped knees and unresolved playground disputes literally rewired them to better handle the crazy complexities of adulthood.
Section 5. Lessons for Modern Childhood. A neutral comparison.
Now, to be incredibly clear here, we are absolutely not judging today's parenting styles or taking sides on how society operates today. We are simply impartially analyzing how fundamentally different environments yield entirely different psychological adaptations. Just look at the contrast. The undesigned childhood of the 1970s heavily featured unstructured exploration and self-directed play. On the flip side, the modern structured childhood leans much more on constant stimulation and carefully managed experiences. One isn't inherently evil, but the simple absence of constant convenience in the 70s literally forced the development of a distinct set of independent coping skills. It's just a classic case of different inputs creating different outputs.
Which brings us to the core takeaway of this entire explainer. Human growth often requires space. Space to struggle, explore, fail, and ultimately recover. Traits like resilience, adaptability, and that quiet confidence we've been talking about, they can't just be handed out. They can't just be taught in a seminar. They absolutely must be authentically experienced. And that space? Well, that was the hidden magical gift of a 1970s childhood.
So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. In our modern world of constant monitoring, smartwatches, and carefully curated experiences, are we giving children enough opportunities to truly learn the phrase, "I can figure it out"? It's definitely a question worth reflecting on as we think about how to provide the space for that exact same quiet resilience to grow today. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring.